Konbanwa minasan. My most anticipated game for this year is easily Final Fantasy XVI. It has been ever since it was announced back in 2020 at the PlayStation 5 showcase. I have not been this excited for a single game since Final Fantasy XV, which was my most hyped and favorite game of 2016. Over the years, through all the trailers, all the little lore bits, every little piece of information that we got, I became enamored with this game's seeming dedication to the more Matsuno-esque style of Final Fantasy. A high fantasy story steeped in political intrigue and getting to know incredibly complex characters. With many of the team members behind Final Fantasy XIV on this project, I knew they were cooking. We were introduced to a framework of a story following the protagonist Clive in multiple stages of his life. From the fall of the duchy he comes from, to his years in slavery, to his eventual emancipation, we've known for a long time now that this is a story in many parts, spanning a long period of time. And overall, from all the information we've been given, we've pretty much already known how that story is going to start. And here, a week out from release, right after a big showcase, a big celebration of all things that this game is bringing to us, we got a taste of what's to come. A demo released featuring the first 2 hours of main story, as well as a couple extras. Now, Final Fantasy games have quite a complicated history with demos in the past decade. Final Fantasy XV had about 2 or 3 different demos depending on what region you're in, and those showed the game in very different states. It was very clearly a work in progress, but 15 was a special case. After that, FF7R got a demo, and it was pretty normal stuff. Just the opening bomber mission, no frills, nothing really that different from the main game. And here we get something very similar, where it quite literally just is the first section of the game, and you get to carry over your progress to the main game. Although I wouldn't be surprised if there's still a day one optimization patch, because a lot of games do that, and this demo does have some frame rate issues. Nothing too noticeable, but it's definitely there and it's been reported on. But really, that's all the background you need. Let's get into the demo itself. So immediately we're introduced to the world of Valistia through many instances of in medias res. So we start out with Phoenix and Titan fighting, you know, the big thing. It's on the logo, it's in all the trailers. We all knew this was coming, and we know that, yeah, it's basically at the beginning of the game or at the end of the first third of the game, something to that nature. And then we get a flash forward to what I'm assuming let's call present time, because, you know, after this we just go back to the past. It's a bit confusing. The main draw of 16 is the icons, the summons. Instead of just being summoned by a magic user for like a big attack, screen clear, no. These are people, human beings, that can take on the power of these godlike entities and become them in their likeness. Kind of like Titan shifters from Attack on Titan, given how the appearance of the icon reflects the appearance of the actual person controlling it. I really like that detail. And I especially like the mid-transformation designs, because that's something Attack on Titan like never really gave us, but there was like fan art and stuff, and there was little snippets where you kind of saw it, and I always found that to be really cool. So I'm glad that now we have like an actual version of that. I'll stop talking about AOT now. Our first bits of gameplay aren't really... Okay, yeah. In the past, I really dogged on this style of cinematic gameplay integration where you just have to... where you're forced to walk forward. And honestly, I thought that that was pretty antiquated at this point. I thought that we kind of stopped doing that after a while. But hey, if the story is as interesting as it is here, I guess I can join the Apologist Brigade for this one. But I don't think I want this to be a habit. And if there are multiple sections throughout the game where you're forced to walk slowly, it's definitely going to take down from replay value. And it's just going to be really annoying. So I hope that they don't do that, but I suppose it's not the end of the world. Now, we don't get a taste of combat in this present day section as Slave Clive. We're just kind of walking around while these huge fucking titans, well, I mean, Titan and Shiva, these huge icons, these summons, these beasts are having this immense fight between themselves. while this entire war of foot soldiers is also going on. And I have to admire the dedication to really showing the destruction that these giants are causing. There is not a single battle between these icons that goes without tons of casualties. There is a complete disregard for foot soldier life. Of course, in this scene, we also get an introduction to the more political side of this story. We see a dispute between the Iron Kingdom and this other one that I forgot the name of. I'll put it on screen. As well as introductions to a few of our major characters that we're going to end up learning a lot more about later on. Now, especially to those of us who have watched all the trailers and such, it's not going to be much of a surprise who is what icon, but there still is a lot of mystery behind this, especially from just what we're shown here. I almost feel like I've watched the first episode of a weekly TV series and I'm waiting patiently for next week's episode, although next week's episode is going to be an entire 30-hour video game. We can clearly see that Benedicta here has her ties in multiple pools. I thought she was the wife of the king of the Iron Kingdom, but she's definitely fooling around with this Titan guy here, and she is a dominant herself, so there's a lot that could happen with her. Especially, I do remember something about her teaming up with Clive, which doesn't seem very likely. I imagine that could possibly even be a misdirect. I do have to levy some criticism about how this game handles its tutorials. These aren't the most common gameplay mechanics that any old gamer would know right off the back of their hand, but I do think that tutorials should be skippable, especially when someone like me, who's played a lot of games by the same developers and the same combat designer, good old Devil May Cry guy, and know the basic framework of how things are gonna go, and like how to figure things out on the fly. I don't mind tutorials, especially when they tell you the inner workings of stats and certain things behind the scenes that you may not get from just hacking and slashing. But I definitely believe in the player's ability to figure things out by looking at menus and just playing the game and trying things out. But we start out in a fairly cozy and familiar fantasy setup. Two brothers that care deeply for each other as well as their childhood friend. A very dubious mother figure that has very strong views on the systems that have been set up in this world. And we see how that affects our two brothers here. I'll get into that a little bit later, but what I do want to mention in this early section, we do meet a couple of minor characters that won't exactly, be in the rest of the game. We do see a dedication to giving these characters a lot of history that we can infer, even from subtle lines. The character that you spar with in the tutorial is clearly putting on a front. He has to because he's a high-ranking soldier in the military, but he really does care for Clive, even though he gives him a hard time. And you can tell just from the few moments of screen time that he has. I had a lot of questions about the family dynamic going in. Since the mother is so dismissive towards Clive, basically doesn't even talk to him, treats him like he's nothing, I thought that maybe he could be a bastard. Maybe this is a Jon Snow situation where the father loves all of his kids dearly, but because of this one thing that happened in the past, a fling during a campaign, Clive was left with many privileges, but not the love of both of his parents. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It's not that simple, actually. Adding to the cozy and familiar yet foreboding vibes that this intro gives off, we meet the king, and he's a really cool guy. It's a too bad what happens to every really cool king character in fiction. This isn't a happy-go-lucky intro or anything. The realities of war and the strife of the world going on is very present. But it's introduced to us through this lens of a normalcy that is creeping to an end. You can feel a longing to stay in the familiar, yet a acknowledgement that it just won't last. We see here that Joshua is very sick, but also the dominant of Phoenix, which gives him incredible healing abilities. Their mother seems to only care for Joshua, and we learn that in an intimate scene between her and the king, where she reveals to us that she's only seeing the power in them. Clive was rejected. He could not become a dominant. He has no such powers, but since Joshua is the dominant of Phoenix, that is why she cares for him so deeply, while shunning Clive so thoroughly. This is even represented in the gameplay itself, where in the courtyard you can talk to Joshua, But no prompt for her. You can hear handmaids speaking in the background, but nothing else there. We're introduced to a built-in lore mechanic, and I think this is incredibly interesting. I mean, this is nothing new to Final Fantasy. We had like the compendium and shit in like Final Fantasy 13 with all the lore that was integral for some people's understanding of that story. Haven't played it myself. But it's really cool to just hit the middle button here and then just be able to read all of this lore. Sadly, I missed out on some of it because the lore updates during cutscenes, which I wasn't aware of. So at any point in the cutscene, if there's a character on screen or something just happened, if you have a question at any point, you can literally just press the middle button and there will be some kind of explanation. Maybe not the one you're looking for at the moment, but hey, only time can give you that information. So we all know that Clive is going to be a slave later on. So it's really important that we have this scene right here, where Clive encounters a member of the slave class and we can clearly see his disapproval of this social hierarchy. A common citizen sees him as less than human. He just does his job. That's his only purpose. But Clive sees the man behind that, the man behind the brand, and just can't help but feel the disgust. Right off the bat, we're characterizing Clive as a man with no taste for injustice. Even in his mid-teenage years, even though he sits pretty high on the social ladder, he still can't condone this. And I think that's very important for the story that's going to be told and the character that's being built here. Although Clive was born into a duchy, his life hasn't been easy. We've been seeing it this whole time, shunned by his mother, feeling inferior to his brother. Sure, the soldiers and the king love him, adore him even, but he struggles to find real acceptance, at least in the way that he sees it. It's something quite relatable to the teenage experience. Alright, time for that normalcy to start breaking down. So we're going on a campaign, we're going on a little quest, we're gonna do some things, get some stuff, see some territories, make some deals, you know, political intrigue, talk to people, try to make sure that, you know, crystals don't go into wrong hands and political strife doesn't happen. Yeah, I'm sure that will work out perfectly fine. Oh yeah, the mother crystals are like the source of all magic. Pretty standard Final Fantasy stuff. We're introduced to Ian and Anthony from Smosh, and we go on to our gameplay tutorial. Our actual gameplay tutorial, not just a little combat thing, whatever. I don't have much to say about this first encounter other than the combat is quality. We've known for a while that this is taking heavy action influence and really is the first true action game in the series. It's a lot less action RPG like the previous titles were. But really, here we're starting small. We don't have that many attacks, we only have one cooldown ability, and most players aren't gonna know about a lot of tech yet. I don't really know how the progression system works because, as far as I'm aware, certain abilities are locked until you can buy them with points and such. I don't think you start out with abilities like Enemy Step or Charge Attacks or Lunge, but who knows, I only played through it once and I didn't notice any of that. But the unique blend of stringing together melee combos as well as magic and leaning on cooldowns and icon abilities shows a lot of promise from the early on. And so, after our first quest, our real gameplay introduction, our boss fight introduction, all of that, it's time for things to go tits up. There's a big feast and a celebration, and oh no, it's an invasion. Okay, we're getting shanked, we're getting burned, this is not working, we're trying to escape. We get a great scene between Clive and Joshua, and multiple throughout this scene. Before the invasion starts, we get a quiet moment with them. Shit's going wrong, soldiers are dying, chocobos are dying, and tragically, we see the fall of the king right here. He wasn't on screen for long, but he was characterized as someone who cared deeply for his kingdom and his family, even to the point of disapproving of his wife's dismissal of his firstborn son. This sends Joshua into Phoenix mode, completely incinerating all of the bystanders. And yeah, that's including Ian and Anthony from Smosh. You did well, boys, you did well. This is where the gameplay first really kicks up. We have a little Joshua segment, which makes me wonder if we'll have anything like this later on in the main game, like playing as other characters, even though I'm pretty sure that everything we've heard so far is that this is going to be a single player experience, just Clive, you know, single character experience. All your party members are just going to be AI, and you won't really need to heal them or anything. Even if it's a one-time thing, it was a really cool section. But the highlight of this set piece is easily the Dragoon mini-boss. This was so hype, from the cutscenes to the cinematic QuickTime events, to the actual fight itself. Because here is where you're really getting a feel for the combat. So you begin to interface with the mechanics on a higher level. And then we get the real crux of the story, the real inciting incident leading to all the further intrigue. And it's more or less what we expected from the trailers. Clive sees a mysterious figure and a burning man, and then seemingly becomes Ifrit. This is very significant because there's not supposed to be more than one icon of a single element. And since Ifrit and Phoenix are both fire element icons, that is a bit of a lore issue. I mean, in the lore it is. It's not supposed to be possible, so what the hell's going on here? Too bad our tutorial man got incinerated as well. This leads into a lengthy cinematic battle where you play as Phoenix fighting off Ifrit. It kind of brings back memories of Asura's Wrath, except, I don't know, it's very scripted. You basically only move the cursor around to shoot and dodge when the time is right. Other than that, you can't really move around, and there's nothing else you can really do in this section. It's very cinematic, but there's not much, player engagement. And then I begin to have many questions about what's going on here. So, okay, from the trailer I thought, okay, Clive becomes Ifrit and ends up killing Joshua in some regard, and or Joshua becomes something else and kills someone or something happens, leaving Joshua dead and Clive seeking revenge. But there's many specific details that have me questioning theories that have cropped up over the years. So we can clearly see that there's a scene where Joshua is looking through Phoenix's perspective and we hear his inner monologue. But when we see Clive's inner monologue in the same kind of style, he is not from Ifrit's perspective. He's from a third-person perspective looking out on the fight. So, what's really going on here? I do want to believe it's something to do with the figure and the burning man that he saw before seemingly transforming. I really hope this isn't going to end up being a story where Clive learns that he was the monster the whole time. That would just be pretty lame, and I hope that they're not going that way, but I'm not entirely assured of that just yet. So, yeah, this is it. Ifrit, whoever is controlling Ifrit, we don't know at this point, ends up seemingly killing Phoenix and Joshua. And I guess here is a better time than any to talk about the performances in this game. Ben Starr does a fantastic job as Clive, and he's showing off a lot of emotional range, even just from this section of the game. But the other performers are all fantastic as well. They give very believable, subtle, and heartfelt performances that keep you immersed in the world that this game is building. Oh, but that's not quite the end of it. So, obviously, the Iron Kingdom has invaded the Duchy of Rosaria. They broke their tentative peace, and shit's gone bad. The Mother is perusing the battlefield accompanied by Iron Kingdom soldiers, killing off any other soldiers that might be left. But when they make it to Clive, she initially decides to have him killed, but on second thought thinks it would be more effective to use his skill as a fighter to sell him into slavery. This is the most evil bitch we've seen thus far. I'm blanking on other examples, but can you imagine? This kid, Clive, is literally her son. She birthed him, and solely because he was not able to take on the power of the Dominant at that time. He is 15 years old at this time. He has no power over an icon. Therefore, she sees him as nothing more than a common man and shuns him in everyday life, and goes as far as to sell him into slavery solely because of his fighting prowess that she hasn't even seen firsthand. She's only ever heard of this from her husband. And of course, she doesn't share much remorse for the death of her husband or Joshua even. She was fully in cahoots with the Iron Kingdom, and she is seemingly the sole reason of the invasion. She sold us out. And she even has her handmaids killed? Okay. What a nasty bitch. So this leaves me with a lot of intrigue, but I'm clearly seeing the potential for a lot more story progression to happen, especially around this mother and Clav's relationship to her. I can only imagine the payoff for this little arc that we've been given. I suppose this is where I kind of stop theory crafting. I just want to see where this story is going to take us next. They've set up so much, we've had so much subtlety and character development already. We've seen so many sides of this world and these people, but there's still so much story to tell, so much more nuance to be gained, and I am simply on the edge of my seat waiting for release day next week. But before all that, before I go with a glowing recommendation for this demo, at least, honestly, you owe it to yourself. If you own a PS5, there is no reason not to at least try the demo. If you weren't sold already from the main story section, which you don't even need to play again, you can just load up your save file, continue on the main game, and you will start off exactly where you left off. They decided, Yoshi P and the gang, the Kino men, decided we're gonna throw them a bone, give them one little tiny section of the game out of context, just so we know that they're sold. And let me tell you, it's perfect. After you beat the main story, the intro, you get the icon challenge. This is an out-of-context gameplay section. It's a set piece from later on in the game where you have tons of abilities unlocked, even some that you're not supposed to have at the time. You even have some free range to upgrade a few abilities and change up some stats. It is the game that I have been waiting for so long. It is expertly crafted. It uses all of these hallmark mechanics from tons of action games throughout the past 2 decades to build such a frantic and mechanical combat system. There's precision dodges, there's parries, there's fucking warp abilities, there's grab abilities like Devil Bringer, there's a Devil Trigger, like any good action game should have. All of the icons have unique abilities, whether it's solely utility or a cooldown attack. And every mechanic builds on each other to make such a robust system. I mean, really, if you're a Devil May Cry or action game veteran at all you need to hear is that it has enemy step. That's all you need to know. Oh yeah, and there are taunts in the game. They put taunts in my Final Fantasy game. It's peak! The boss fight with Benedicta here is unreal. It's such a spectacle. It's not just the cutscenes, like you're really in it. It's weighty and deliberate, but fast and not restrictive. It's stylish and empowering without being ridiculous. It takes perfect use of integrating action game mechanics with JRPG mechanics. It rewards smart play, quick thinking, knowledge of the mechanics. It's a game delivered with confidence. Throughout the game's development, throughout all the trailers, everything, we were assured that on day one, we are getting a full, complete game. Fully featured, no free updates, no DLCs. I mean, we'll see, maybe they'll want to have a story DLC later, but probably not later. This game is the culmination of years of hard work. It is a culmination of one side of the Final Fantasy series, bringing this dark fantasy tactics, ogre, Final Fantasy Tactics kind of style to a modern, big-budget AAA extravaganza experience. Cinematic is the word of the day, but it doesn't take away from the gameplay in any respect. I'll put an end to my gushing here, and I'll leave you with a little context into my personal history. So, when I was 14, my 2 favorite game series ever, bar none, were Final Fantasy and Devil May Cry. And somehow, some way, I always wanted a game that could bridge the gap. Now, obviously, the Final Fantasy games had great combat systems, turn-based or not. and the Devil May Cry games had great stories. Maybe not the first two, but you know what I mean. But here it is. We have an extremely thought out high fantasy story with dedication to nuance and subtlety, with combat that rivals the peaks of the genre, and in a package that is seemingly going to be able to satisfy most consumers through JRPG fans, Western RPG fans, to action game fans, to cinematic story game fans. It's simply one of the games that I've been waiting for since I was a little kid playing fucking, I don't know, Disgaea 4 on the PS3, hoping for something better. Not to knock Disgaea 4. It just seems like everything video games have been building up to for me. And I could not be more happy with this little slice of heaven that we've been given. And I just can't wait to see what's in store next. Anything could happen. We're in the wilderness now. Everything that I thought was going to happen already happened. And now I have no predictions left. None at all. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Please make sure to check out the main channel if you want to see more scripted, story-based game analysis. Hopefully there'll be a Final Fantasy 16 video one day. That'll take a while because my videos are getting longer. Please stay tuned for the current videos. Please subscribe to this channel if you want quick, fast gameplay, community discourse and stuff. News? I don't know about news. I'm just fucking talking in front of a green screen and a fucking copy of Rants 10. Anyways, I've been Protagonist 2. Please subscribe to Protagonist. Stay tuned. Matane.